I'd like to call the Police Oversight Board Policy and Procedure Review Subcommittee to order, and it's Thursday, April 4th, and all the members are present. I'd like to actually change the agenda, so before we approve it, give a motion for approval of the agenda, I'd like to move the item item 7, the review of APD use of force report, to the first item on the agenda. So that since we have representatives from APD here, we can start with that. So if I can get a motion to change the order of the agenda, if that's needed.
I so move.
Move it to item 5.
Move it to item 5, right.
Second.
So we have a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Approval of the minutes. We have a motion to approve the minutes from February 7th.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Okay, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we're at item 4, public comment. Seeing none, we'll move to item 5. So, the 2016-17 APD use of force report was released, a few weeks ago. I believe you did a presentation of this at a meeting that I missed, or maybe you didn't. Okay. In any case, it thought it was, given that the main reason for existence of the Police Oversight Board is the fact that the use of force was called to the attention of the community by DOJ. I thought it would be appropriate that and there's been a lot of change in the use of force policies. I would like to invite you to come and tell us about the use of force report. I meant this just to be a sort of an informative discussion. We're not just to understand what's in the report, what the concerns are, and where we go from here. I know that most of the changes in use of force have been after this reporting period, so I recognize that it doesn't reflect what the current policy is, but it'll be good to have this information now and then move on from there. So I invite you to jump in however you'd like to do it, if you can. And we can keep it informal. I just want to get the information out.
Yep. If you like, first what I'd like to do is introduce us. This is Commander Middleton, you all know, and he's heads the Internal Affairs Force Review section. That is Natalie David. She is the key data analyst over there. I'm Peter Winograd, and I work in compliance, and Sharon Press has been working with me on that. Natalie and Sharon and I did the report. There's lots of stuff from everybody else. It's from all over the department. We pulled it together. Commander Middleton's got the best sense of all the details and the background. Have you all read this? You got it? Okay, so you haven't read
Yes,
it?
I have read it. I haven't studied it, but I.
Okay, do you have a copy?
I do not.
It's online.
Yes.
I'll go searching.
Okay.
It was emailed on March 18th.
Okay. I didn't see it.
Yep. I think the best way to start is, let me just give you a really brief overview of what's in it. And then if you all have some questions, you can ask, and we'll let Commander Middleton take most of those. If it's something else, I'll be able to answer, Natalie or Sharon will be able to answer.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Yes, yeah.
I'm going to scooch over here. Chantal?
She says it was emailed. I'm going to pull it up.
Yeah.
Okay, because, yeah,
Pull up shares if you guys like it.
Yeah.
do you have a copy too?
I don't have it with me, but I've looked at it.
All right, I think, just again, it'll be
I can
easier.
pull it up on my computer.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay, sure. of force annual report?
Yes, ma'am.
Those things right there for me.
Okay. If you take a look at the table of contents, we've organized it in a couple of ways. What's in this report, and then the CASA and the use of force annual report, and then understanding the data, APD's use of force policies, and then different sections dealing with what is required in the CASA for the use of force. In the what's in this report, we looked at a 2-year period of data, 16 and 17, because APD had not published an annual use of force report since 2015. And we picked that for a couple of reasons. First off, nothing had been published for 2 years. And second, it didn't make sense to do a 16 and then a 17 when a larger data set would just be more helpful. The other is because of the CASA and the requirements in the CASA for the use of force annual report, and it's in a couple of different paragraphs. There's one major paragraph, and then there's an ECW and a couple of others. They ask for some measures and some variables that just took some time to figure out how to do, and I'll show you those. We've had this conversation a number of times. The data collected by the department is just very complex. It's changed a lot over the years. It's spotty in some places. As we say in here, over the years it's been poor at best. Some things are very good, some things aren't. Natalie spends a huge amount of time verifying the data and making sure it's complete. And that's just huge. This is a format that has been used by other departments. Seattle is a prime example where they've done multi-year data sets. The 2018, the department plans on doing that later this summer. So that's the introduction.
So, if I can interrupt.
Oh, please,
As
let's
far
make
as
this a conversation.
Right, and thank you. And as far as data sets go, how do you pull together the data? And do you end up with the data set for this report in one file essentially, or in one set of files?
It's a number of sets depending on the analysis. The data is pretty complex, and what we can do as we go through is I'll tell you that's what this data set looks like as we look at the sections.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. If you look at page 4, there's the CASA and the use of force, and paragraph 79 has that list of A through M. Paragraph 23 talks about critical firearms discharges, and those need to be in a use of force. Paragraph 38 is the ECWs. Paragraph 104 is canine and deployment. And then if you look at page 5, we've organized this in a narrative, more of again, the same kind of approach other departments have done. If we just did the item by item according to the CASA, it would be a list and it bounces back and forth. So this is a more readable narrative. The required elements are in, you can see on that chart on page 5, so they're all in there. Now, Dr. Cass, let's talk about the data here a little bit. And this is understanding APD's use of force. I'm going to take the first shot at it. Natalie, keep me straight, because you've only explained this to me 400 times each day over the last 4 years.
We're on page 6?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So the data come from IA Pro primarily, and there's a huge number of columns and kinds of data in IA Pro. What makes sense is to pull that data down, identify the columns that you need and the time period you need and the variables you need, and make subsets. Otherwise, you're dealing with something just too complex. We use Excel and Tableau. And if you just threw everything into Tableau, it just breaks Tableau. So you end up with separate sub-data sets. Now, there's two key ways of thinking about this that's really important. There is a use of force. Let me step back into it. There is an interaction between a police officer and an individual citizen, or individual citizens, individuals. They may not even be citizens, so individuals. Could be one officer, one individual. Could be two officers, one individual. One officer, two individuals. Multiple officers, multiple individuals. There can be a use of force, and we'll define that even more in a little bit. There can be a show of force. There can be a show of force in a use of force situation. So Commander Middleton pulls out his taser and shows that it's ready. That's a show of force, and this officer actually does hands-on. Conceptually, it's important to separate those out to there's uses of force which can contain a show of force, and there's shows of force in which there is no use of force. But a show of force can be in either place. So, but we've separated them out because logically, when you do the analysis, you'll see that.
Hey, Peter, can I just put one
Please,
thing in there?
just a conversation.
So just to back it up one piece, and then we'll jump right back into where Peter is. When he was talking about breaking Tableau, when you think about that, a lot of people think, well, you're just putting uses of force in there. You know, is it 10, 20, 30, 100, what? How can that break a system? But if you back that up, you're looking at 450,000 incidents, and then you get to this data set. So 450,000 is a big number. Okay.
Yeah. The
You
data.
were going to say that you would never do a show of force without committing.
There's IA Pro, there's the CADs, which are the computer-aided dispatches, and that's the 450,000, almost 500,000 times officers are dispatched. There's a thing called the persons database, and that tells whether a person has been arrested, cited, or summoned. It's the official records. Whether the person is interviewed. There's the behavioral health data, that's a totally different data set. And so a lot of this is putting data together across those data sets. If you look at the bottom of 6, 7, and 6 and 7, the different analyses within the CASA and just within good practice require a different level of analysis. So we have cases, and a case is an incident, and it could have multiple people, multiple officers, multiple subjects, multiple types of force, multiple shows of force. So when you look at the Excel, it's one case in like 10 or 15 rows because all the rows are different things. If you're asking where it took place, that's a case. The next one is the individuals. If it's one officer and it's a man or woman, and you're asking a man and a woman, and you're asking for demographics, it's one case, but it's two demographic variables. The third is the force application. One officer used a taser and a hands-on. That's one case, but two applications of force. And when Dr. Ginger does his CASA reports, the 298 reports, he counts, the major thing he looks at is applications. And so it's really important to be clear on that, because if you say how many applications of force were there, there might be 50, but there might only be 25 cases and 30 individuals. So again, the way to think about it is, was it a use of force that also included a show of force? Was it just a show of force? Are you talking about the case level for some analysis, the person level, the individual for some analysis, or the force applications for some analysis? And again, in terms of keeping very complex data analysis straight and double checking everything, you create from a master data pools, you create very specialized data sets that let you do those analysis.
May I ask you a question?
Oh, please.
Okay. I understand that not all show of forces end with a use of force.
Correct.
But do all use of forces begin with a show of force?
No.
No, okay.
Okay, got you. Good question. Good question. So what we, if you take a look at the charts on 6, 7, and 8, the way these charts are built throughout, there's show of force only, use of force, which may include a show of force, and total, and this is the cases, 16, 17, and then you see the grand total at the side. There's people, and 1,096 total cases, 1,136 total people, and 2,219 applications. So that's the difference. The next section is APD's use of force policies, and I'm going to let Commander Middleton talk about those. And on page 9 are some of the changes which have been made during 16 and 17. And actually the major changes in how force was defined was in 16 and 17. The use of force policy that's just been approved or in the final process is the policy, but what gets counted got changed a bunch during 16 and 17. Sir?
I think we were part of this conversation from the very beginning. It was back in March of 2018 is when we started about the use of force policies, about what we're going to change. So I might just leave it for questions for you, but the entire use of force policy was changed, and we included 252, 53, 54, 56, and 57. So we broke it out. We added de-escalation techniques to it, and the use of force policy suite was approved January 31st. The Academy's working on training for that now. So I'm not sure at what level you want me to jump into this because you were part of the conversations the entire time. So
Yeah, go ahead.
The Academy's working on training, or?
it's been submitted. They have a couple deadlines that they met, and the training plan is already submitted to the parties to review. And then once that training's approved, it will be delivered. And that's the next step in compliance. So it's developing the policy first, then the training, then the actual operationalizing.
So something came to my attention at the POB meeting the other last time we had one, and it was about, it had to do nothing with use of force, but the fact that there were orders that the chief could issue that would essentially have the status of an SOP virtually. And I notice here that there's a couple of things outside of the use of force, like 71, 72, 73, Professional Accountability Bureau order, which I guess that shows up as an SOP. But
That is a unit policy, so it's Internal Affairs Professional Standards Unit policy. The 72 is Internal Affairs, it will be force divisions. But I'm not sure, are you talking about special orders?
Well, my question is really about what should we be aware of that exists that can have an impact on the use of force usage in the field? I mean,
That will be the, in the policy, it'll say all related policies to it. So you'll see unit policies attached to that. You'll see behavioral health policies attached to it. So you'll see 2-19, you'll see 7-1, 7-2, which is Internal Affairs Professional Standards, Internal Affairs Force Division, and then you'll also, I don't think they'll have the special orders in there as well, but you'll see 3-41 and 3-46 as well, and that's how that includes citizen complaints, internal complaints, and then timelines to deal with internal affairs investigations as it applies to the use of force policy. So all of that will affect it.
Okay, and how do we, I mean, short of doing a search of, to track through this, I mean, how does one find that kind of information so that?
It's all on Power DMS, and I know anybody can log in to Power DMS and see our policies, right, or the policies actually attached to make the web.
Well, I'm thinking of how do I know something exists that could, isn't obvious, isn't an obvious SOP that might have an impact on use of force.
Right.
That's what I'm after.
Okay, so I know in the title page of the use of force policy 2-52, it lists all the related policies that affect it.
Okay.
So they're all there, including the behavioral health one, 2-19. So.
And this may help too, if you're looking at the chart on page 8, the procedural orders, the 252 to 256
Right.
are the use of force. There's the K-9, and then the 3 at the bottom talk about how force is to be reviewed.
Right.
And I think I understand what you're asking, but yeah, it is all listed there in the face sheet of 2-52.
Okay, all right. Well, it was clear that, other forces, that's a bad use of terms, but other factors exist in terms of, determining policy. And this was a case of what the point system that the chief recently implemented for crashing.
Right, and that comes from the Internal Affairs Professional Standards side on, what do they call it, NPEMS, or, yeah, so there's the points that are assigned to that where you build that up, and it's in your, what is it, EIRS now, there's so many acronyms.
Yes, right. Well, but my point was that it didn't start as an SOP. It may end up as an SOP perhaps, but somehow a policy got created or something that governed the way APD interacted with the community, and it wasn't all wasn't obvious, immediately obvious as to where the source came from. And so it's got little hidden factors that I was just curious about. So.
I'm trying to think so let's just say if that happens today, somebody starts talking about, hey, how can we further affect the use of force policy? If I'm sitting in your chair, I would want to know about that right away. And that's probably what you're asking.
Yes.
So if something like that is being developed, let us know, and how can I find it?
Yes.
We will ensure that happens. And I'm trying to think of anything outside of what we're talking about. The only other thing I can think of outside of what we talked about just now are contracts. So union contracts, civilian contracts, things that govern their rights as an employee will affect use of force in the investigation of use of force.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
The thing on 9, we'll come back to that, page 9. There have been some changes in what got defined as a reportable use of force in 16 and 17. And I'm going to come back to those. When you look at the data, it'll help. That's important. Now, calls for service and the use of force. These are all required elements in the CASA. There's the calls for service. Those are the dispatched CADs, computer-aided dispatched, 911. There's about 500,000 of them. They've got to be filtered because you have BOLOs, you have canceled, you have 4s, which are kind of canceled. Some of them, the officers get there and there's nobody there. Some of them turn into cases. It's got traffic, it's got domestic violence, it's the full CAD data set. These were filtered down for just those calls, just those 480,000 calls that officers were actually dispatched to. And so it's minus canceled and BOLOs. And you see, this is at, yes, sir?
Could you have also eliminated calls where there was a potential for not any interaction with people, such as alarms?
The answer is possibly. So let me say this to that. One of the things we are doing, it was in the compliance plan we're working on right now, is a data cookbook with specific recipes on what steps to take. We went to New Orleans. New Orleans has it. It's a really nice piece of work. And in answer to your question, it'll say when one pulls the CADs, one filters for these 5 things. And if you filter for those 5 things, you'll get what we got. Now, what you've just asked is, what about a 6th thing? We just need to argue that out. And if everybody agrees that alarms has no potential for human interaction, and we put that into the cookbook, then everybody will follow that and we'll end up with the data sets. You and I can sit here and debate, well, some of the alarms end up with human interaction,
Right.
some of them
Sure.
don't. But what we're doing, and Sharon is working on this one particularly, is a cookbook that it will be a public document, so that as you all look at the data sets that we sent to Dr. Ginger, you'll be able to say step A, step B, step C, this is how we got it. And then we're doing that because what has happened over the years is somebody somewhere will say, well, I want to add this step, and not tell everybody else in the department. And so when you look at the data, names have, or variable names have been changed, names have been changed. It's just there's no policy with teeth that says you can't make changes to how the data is entered or analyzed without making sure it gets approved so that we're all doing the same thing. The worst thing that happens is Natalie does it her way and she knows how to do it and has been doing it for years. I do it by what seems reasonable to me, and I get 427, she gets 560, and everybody goes, what's what? So, when you all look at this and start to argue, we need to add a step, why is this step, then that gets set. What you've got there is there were 413 individuals involved in use of force incidents in 16 and 422 and 17, and that's where that percent comes from. And it's a very small percent. Now, I've said this in every MRAC meeting and all the other meetings. Every use of force is huge. Any bad uses of force are huge. There's statistical significance and social significance. I absolutely understand that. We all understand that. But it's a small number. Chart 5, go back to page 4 for a minute. In the CASA, they asked for number of arrests and number of custodial arrests that involved use of force. Chart 5 is the arrest data, and that's the official arrest data that APD uses in its regular annual report and reports to the FBI in UCR. And that comes from the persons database. And so this is one of the places we're very careful to use the official number. We've talked to DOJ. We've had detailed conversations amongst ourselves within the department. What's an arrest versus a custodial arrest? And if somebody is cited or summoned, is that in fact a kind of an arrest? So we've got careful definitions about that. And again, that's in the cookbook to be back and forth. What you see there is total number of arrests made by APD and total number of uses of force that resulted in arrests. And also then the number of percent of uses of force that resulted in arrests. So 2 different ways of looking at the arrest data.
In terms of the factor of use of force of interest, though, this doesn't really impact that. This impacts the denominator in terms of the number of calls, or I mean, so that when you calculate a percentage, it may change your percentage, but you've already established the number of uses of force, or you know, whether, no matter what kind of arrest it is.
Gotcha.
Right?
Right.
So, I mean, it's of less importance than the use of force number, but it just, all it does is impact the percentage of contacts or arrests that result in.
Dr. Cass, I can't believe you're telling me that if you change the denominator, that's not important.
Well, it's not as important as changing the numerator. That's my.
You just have to have clear definitions of
Right,
what's
okay.
a numerator and what's a
Right.
denominator. So it's just, again, it's definitions. Yes, ma'am.
And so what is the definition? Because I notice I have a criminal defense experience, and criminal defense attorneys tend to view what is an arrest a lot differently from what police consider arrests, I've noticed. So like an officer tends to view an arrest as that time when a person is placed in cuffs, put in the back of a patrol unit, and booked into jail. Whereas like a criminal defense attorney might consider just like a prolonged investigatory seizure an arrest. And so there's a big spectrum. What is this working definition roughly, if you can answer that?
That's the definition that APD uses when it turns in number of arrests to the FBI.
Which is?
Yeah,
what
I know you're at. I don't know to be able to tell you that exactly right now. And that's a good question. But again, when we said arrest, that's what we were looking for. In terms of the variables in the person's database, the official record says the person was arrested, not cited, not summoned, arrested.
And arrested is beyond a detention with probable cause, and whenever there is probable cause, the result is, like you said, booking the jail, but you can also, with probable cause, write a citation or summons, but it's beyond a detention, so that's defined.
The CASA asks for the numbered percent of uses of force by officer-initiated actions compared to dispatch calls. The CADs that were categorized as officer-initiated are on-site traffic, on-site disturbance, traffic stop, on-site suspicious person, and on-site auto theft and TAC plan.
What's TAC plan?
So a TAC plan is a directed activity by a supervisor, and it can be defined from anywhere. I mean, a community or observations or the RTCC, they can define a problem in a certain area, and a supervisor will assign a set of officers or resources to that area to address it. Not necessarily target it, but to address that area.
Okay, thanks.
Page 12 is the use of force by force type. There's also levels of seriousness and critical firearms discharges. I think the important thing to say there is the majority of uses of force are what are classified as empty hand techniques. But you can see the levels of serious firearms discharge, non-serious use of force, and critical firearms discharges, so there's 12 and 13.
Something that I noted, and I don't know if we've come to it yet or not, was the difference. I'm curious about the difference between the use of force in officer-initiated contact versus CAD versus dispatch. And I know you point that out.
Yeah, it's
somewhere.
chart 7,
Okay, that was
page 11.
right. And it points out that 88% of their CAD are result from CADs. I mean, contacts come from CAD, right? And 11% are officer initiated. So do you break down here the difference between the frequency of use of force coming from an officer-initiated contact versus a CAD contact.
If you take a look at chart 7, let's look at year 216 as an example. There were 406 total cases right there. 88% were dispatched and 11% were officer initiated. And if you look across 217, it's about the same.
Okay, and of those 40, I guess it's 46%, or 46 cases and 45 cases that are officer initiated, is the frequency of use of force, is it greater frequency if it's an officer initiated action or if it's a dispatch call?
Trying to see what types of force are you seeing most in the officer initiated versus the dispatch?
Is it
are you
types of
looking
force?
at-
Well, just force.
Because these are all force, right?
They're
Plus
all
seven,
force.
they're all force.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, those are all force.
that is the
incidents.
answer, I believe.
So what he's asking is, let's just say there's 10 officer-initiated ones and 10 dispatch ones. Is the likelihood going to be higher that there's a use of force in the officer-initiated one? Or it's
Gotcha.
8 out of 10?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Exactly.
Yep, my sense is, actually, that's a good question, I don't know. There's so many computer-aided dispatched ones, like 450,000, so you sort of got to think smart about how you do that. But that's a good question.
So I think not coming from a data analyst perspective, but a cop perspective, just because I was in the field for so long, I know that a cop, when they're patrolling, so you're driving down a residential street, and like, let's just say you're in an area where, residents have been complaining about mail theft, break-ins, and you put yourself in that area, you're not being dispatched to anything, but you're just driving and doing proactive police work. Your likelihood of witnessing something goes up a little bit. And then when you do witness something, you're going to immediately jump out and address it, and issue commands and do everything a cop's supposed to do. So, but as opposed to a dispatch call, you can be dispatched to any call, no matter what it is, like just to mediate or anything. So that pool is 450,000. So the likelihood of using force on all of those is pretty low. But when you're placing yourself in a situation, or placing yourself on patrol in an area where you're going to jump out immediately and address things immediately, I would think maybe, I'm not going to answer it directly, but maybe your chances of getting a use of
Well,
force could be
actually, this is a good conversation.
It could be which, I didn't hear what you.
It could be higher.
So
But
let
I
me.
would have to look at data first.
Yeah, so let me say this, because we've been doing these kinds of analysis. If an officer is dispatched to a domestic violence call,
Yeah.
those are very high in uses of force. They're amongst the highest. So if you were to compare officers dispatched to domestic violence versus officer-initiated actions, that's probably going to be higher.
And officer-initiated actions could be traffic stops. So if I go out there and I do 70 car stops on Montgomery and I'm writing tickets, my chances of use of force are almost zero. But if I go to 70 domestic violence calls, it's going to be really high,
Right. Yes.
So just like you're saying, it depends on what you're looking at.
And you
Right.
don't actually track that now.
We do track it.
You do track it.
Oh, we don't track the specific analysis you were asking for within officer-initiated, but you'll see here in a little bit, we do track the context of which calls tend to have higher uses of force.
Okay.
I'll tell you the big problem with this data set is there's so many possible interesting additional analyses. And then we were talking about this. These are the main analysis. As you know, if you do a interaction by gender, by level of seriousness, by area of location, you can end up with 5, 6, 7-way interactions, which are all pretty interesting, but one could go very old doing this.
Right.
The firearm discharge numbers, would that be, you're not
Which
counting,
table is it?
sorry, we're at chart number 8.
Okay, all right.
So when it's broken down by type, we see firearm discharge. I'm curious, does that count the number of times a firearm is discharged, or?
It's the number of officers, so you're counting the number of weapons right there for that.
Okay, so that means
So you
that
could
if
have,
an officer fired multiple times, it counts as one because it's counted by the officer.
right, the same as the ECW is counted as one.
Okay, so even if you discharge, if you taste
So
twice, it's one.
It's one discharge, but then you have 2 cycles.
Uh-huh.
That's how it's tracked, unless the officer goes in and adds another. So if they discharge it in the projectile and then they do a follow-up drive stun, they'll do a second entry for the ECW drive stun. So then that'll be one drive stun, but then it could be 2 cycles. So they could apply it two times.
And sometimes they'll take the probe off and shoot another person as well, so that would be 2
That
cycles.
would be then an additional entry for the ECW.
Okay.
But since you have
I suck
one
at dating, man.
handgun,
What?
And a cycle is 5 seconds, so they don't count.
Exactly.
They don't count one firing of an ECW as 5 because it ticks off. Those are
Right.
5 seconds.
yeah,
Okay, I
that's
think
the
I do.
duration.
Partially, it's to be able to, your question's a good one. Partially, the question is, you're looking at type. So to do it, as Natalie said, at the officer level, if there's 2 hands-on by 1 officer and 2 ECWs and 1 fire, all of a sudden you're counting slightly different things. And so it really is, what's the best analysis to be able to compare use of force applications. You guys ready? Cool. The ECW, the CASA asks for a couple of analyses, specific analyses for ECWs, and this is some that Natalie and I have been working on for a while. It's the number and percent of ECW uses compared to all other use of force types, change from previous year. The ECW's level of effectiveness, and officers have to make a judgment about whether they think the use of force they used was effective in getting the individual to comply. And so those are what those analyses are. I want to say on chart 13, because this is an important, they asked for the number and percent of show of force types by officers' level of effectiveness. They wanted to know, let me tell you exactly what the question was. All right, go back to page 4 for a minute. At the bottom of page 4, the CASA says, and the tracking of ECW laser paintings and arcing and the impact on compliance rates of individuals. ECW laser painting and arcing is a show of force. And so on chart 13, what Natalie and I did was we compared the show of force using ECWs to other shows of force. It did not make sense to say, I did a display with my ECW, and then everybody else came in and actually used force and try and attribute compliance to a dynamic situation. So these are all displays, and whether a display of the ECW was more or less effective than the display of a handgun or the display of a rifle. So that's what that analysis is.
So, I'm trying to, I see that ECWs as I guess I'd like to see, is there a comparison between the use of ECWs and more lethal uses of force?
Yes. Look at chart, first off, let me just say this. What is your all's time? Is this fine?
This is fine, yeah. We have until 2 o'clock to vacate this room. We have some business that we'd like, and I think if we have a half hour left, or less, we're okay. So
Right.
we're-
Well, when you all are ready, just say thanks,
Yes.
we've got enough to go.
Okay, all right, thank you. No, this is very interesting, I don't want to cut it short.
I know, y'all are
I
starting
think-
to look like my relatives at Thanksgiving. They ask me what I do for a living.
No, I'm,
Okay,
so,
so if you look at chart 11, now here's the thing.
okay, that,
Yeah, and partly, again, this is trying to figure out how to do a legitimate analysis to answer what the CASA asked. And if we go back to the cookbook, this is the way we did it. Once the cookbook's out there, y'all can argue, everybody can argue, no, you need to do B rather than A. We all agree we'll do B. But this is what we did. In a lot of these situations, a number of force applications are used together. You can't compare. You can't talk about what's being used. So we looked at all other uses of force types without ECW.
right,
We looked at ECW alone, and we looked at ECW and arcing as part of a use of force incident where there was other weapon types used. And then what we've done throughout is show where the missing data was, so that you all had a sense, and APD has a sense of what they got to pay attention to. And so chart 11 is that analysis.
and that includes empty hand techniques and
Yes, sir.
all uses of force. So
Yes.
I'm curious about how does the bottom line is, how does ECW impact the use of more lethal force? Do you think there's an impact? And I guess I'm gonna
Yeah,
sort of direct
please.
that at the,
So let me just maybe see if I can clear that up. You're asking is if somebody shows force with an ECW, does that mean that we're going to reduce or eliminate the need to use force, or does it step up, or does it have any effect on using lethal force?
right, the latter, I mean, as much as anything. But I mean, I'm just curious, what impact do ECWs have on more lethal force, whether it's,
Right.
you know, in whatever capacity?
I think based on what Dr. Winograd and Natalie have produced here, that they have shown it. I think that'd be more speculating, but I think they have shown, and there's data to show that ECWs have reduced or eliminated the need to use force, because there are standalone show of force incidents with ECW. So by saying that, they are involved in critical incidents where they've displayed or showed force with an ECW and not used force, which means, I think factually said, which means you have not used lethal force.
Right.
I can't get out a crystal ball either and say, we have eliminated it, but we have proven that we have not used lethal force by showing force with an ECW.
Well, and I think that's the lore, certainly, the reason the department, any department, uses ECWs is that it takes away the necessity to use bullets.
Right.
And in principle, that's a safer, somewhat safer, and so it would be good to drive it in that direction. I guess what I'm asking is there now evidence that would indicate that that's really, that hypothesis is true?
I think your chart shows that.
Actually, take a look at chart 8, because this is a good question.
Good question.
So let me say this. Remember, the definition of what got reported as a force type changed in 16 and 17.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at chart 11, there's the 16 and 17 data. You got some changes in there that may be related to definition.
Right.
Once 18 and 19 get in there and you've got stable definitions, you can look at trends. If you look at ECW in 16, you see 6% and then 11% from 16 to 17. If you look down at less lethal firearms discharges or any of those others, what you got the beginnings there are the trend lines of types of force. So I think what you are asking, the evidence would be once all the definitions are stable, over time you'd see ECW go like this and you'd see more serious uses of force go like that. And that would be the argument that ECWs
Right.
are having an impact on other kinds. If they all go up, then, and they all go up,
Right.
then there's more uses of force, there's more policing going on, appropriate or however you want it. So that's, chart 8 is the beginning of that. But because the definitions flopped around a little bit, it's hard to know what's a trend and what's a definition.
Right.
So chart number 8, I think we'll
Okay,
get
yeah,
at that.
that's good. Thank you.
So when we have the same conversation next summer, 2020, we'll have a better idea of the answer to that.
Yes. Page 16 and 17 are the SWAT deployments and K9. And if you all are good, I'd like to go to 18 and 19 to talk about ethnicity, because that was such a kind of important one, and I want to be cognizant of time.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so if you go to 18 and 19, Dr. Cass, when you and I were talking, we presented to Albuquerque Forward the set of meetings that you did not come to, Ed came to. There was meetings with Albuquerque Forward, and those folks, and then there was the meeting with you a little bit later. They specifically asked for our methodology for demographics. And we produced that, and we can give that to you. It's public, we can share. But we talked about the methodology that APD is using to look at demographics. And the key thing there is, again, we'll send it to you if you like. All of the APD forms, the mental health forms, the CIT worksheets, the use of force forms, there's a third one, I'm trying to remember what it was, have people talk about their ethnicity, their race, gender, and so forth. And what we've done is we've used a pretty standard procedure to put ethnicity and race together. Actually, it's race and ethnicity. And so anybody whose race is African American or black first is categorized as black. Anybody whose race is Native American and ethnicity varies has been classified as Native American. Hispanic varies, and then we've separated out white non-Hispanic versus white Hispanic. And we've used appropriate census methods. We've shown both approaches, and we shared that. So that was that conversation. And again, this is a cookbook. Once that's there, everybody can argue and say, no, you need to do it this way. But this is the way that other departments and the census do race and ethnicity. Chart 17 is the race, ethnicity of individuals involved in use of force incidents. You see Hispanic, white, Native American, black, Pacific Islander, Asian, and then a percent that were just not specified. You see gender and age on the next pages. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any analysis of proportionality, like comparing these, like Hispanic persons involved in a use of force compared to how many Hispanic persons were involved in or were the subject of a dispatch or a officer-initiated contact, et cetera?
Yes. The answer is yes, and that's partly what we shared. Let me say a couple of things about the conversations that have come up. And you all help me with this. And Director, you were at some of these meetings. Albuquerque is a sanctuary city, so it's not appropriate to ask people their citizenship. So that was a conversation that came up. The CADs do not record race or ethnicity. So that data is not available there, and it wouldn't be appropriate to put it there. We have done analysis, and we shared that in the methodology we did. If you look at the 2017 census for Albuquerque, if you go to the Fast Facts on the census and look at Albuquerque 2017, don't hold me to these numbers. Hispanics are like 48%. White non-Hispanics are like, 40%. Native Americans are, I think, about 5%. And African Americans, blacks are about 3% of Albuquerque. Slightly bigger in New Mexico, slightly bigger in Bernalillo. You can find those. When you compare that to these, then you get the analysis that you're talking about, the disparate impact analysis. If Native Americans make up 5% of the population and they're 90% of the use of force, that raises a question. The national debate is this. Do you use, it's the denominator, do you use the proportion of population in the city as your denominator, or do you look at the crime rate? Because if you look at who are the victims of crime, Native Americans and African Americans, particularly women, are the subject of lots of crime. And where do officers go? They go to where the crime is. So let me read this to you, because we've spent a lot of time on this. Actually, read the first two paragraphs to yourself. There's no reason for me to read that to you. The paragraphs at the top.
Of which page?
Page 18.
I think the way Dr. Winograd said that too is officers go to where the victims of crime are, and a lot of times the question is asked the cops, do you go to where you think the suspects are? And when you start talking race and ethnicity, that's a really good way to state it, is the victims of crime. We're going to where people are being victimized.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they make up a higher percent, the black Hispanic make up the higher
But go ahead,
percentage.
please read those first two paragraphs, because this is the key question, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about this.
It seems like if you were worried about, like, whether patrolling was happening in a disparate way, then you would be able to compare these numbers with just juxtaposing them against the officer-initiated contacts, right?
Yeah,
Which is like a super small segment,
yeah.
right?
Looking at traffic stops or those kinds of things, and seeing who's being pulled over. And that's a kind of analysis that has been done elsewhere. It's required in some of the other consent decrees, Baltimore, New Orleans, and so forth. That's not part of the APD consent decree, but it's clearly an important conversation.
Okay, so we didn't do that
No.
comparison here?
No.
Okay.
But this is a starting point, and Sarita Nair, from that,
This is
CAO,
CAO.
is very interested in having these conversations. I know the department is, and I know the ABQs and you all are. So this is critical information. All right. There's English proficiency. Then there's context. And I wanted to say on chart 21, this is the type of CAD call where there's use of force. If officers are called to a fight in progress, there tends to be
Higher uses of force.
higher uses of force. You can see suspicious persons and domestic violence and family disputes, auto thefts, shoplifting. So that goes way back to your question. If you were going to compare officer initiated, you don't want to do it against all CADs. You want to get closer to really apples versus kind of apples.
Right.
How many individuals were armed during the use of force? And then injuries. And then we did some geospatial analysis, location. And we ended with a glossary. And that gives you a half hour to finish.
Thank you. So, go ahead.
Sorry, before you guys leave, would you say that there are any, two things. One, was there any looking at the rank of an officer and his relative rates of use of force? Is there anything there that might suggest training or experience, as it increases, reduces the rate at which force is used?
That's a really good question. I want to put this in a slightly larger context. One of the complaints we heard about this was there was no behavioral health data in here. That data is in the MRAC report, which we publish. So that's there. We are currently working on paragraph 298. And 298 is the outcome data. There's a whole section on use of force, there's a whole section on CIT outcomes, it's all the outcome data. That outcome data asks for rates of use of force, in and out of policy, a number of other things. And the last section of that is section 5 in 298.1, which says CADs, arrests, and any other factors of interest to all the parties. And so this, again, these data sets are huge. Now, all the questions you guys have asked are really good questions. We've asked a bunch of them. Mm-hmm. Partly, when we get to 298 and we start looking at that last one, the other kinds of analysis that are worth doing, then looking at individuals, looking at their rank, looking at their training, what shift are they on? Is this happening later? Is it officer initiated? There's just a huge number of really detailed analysis that can be done. And so this is the use of force. There's the 298, which builds on this, and there's some overlap. There's the MRAC, which builds on this, and there's some overlap. So this isn't the only place to do that. And the other is, this was really important we get this thing done. It hadn't been done for 2 years.
I think, so he mentioned quite a few places, but there's one more place too, which will be done very soon, and that's the backlog. So that's a 304 case snapshot of 2017. And that will be made available, more than welcome to look at it any time. I actually have the printed cases built up in my office right now. But that will show you all the officers and the number of years they have on, and it'll have everything. We'll be able to show you on this case, at this time, this officer had 5 years on, and this was the result. On this case, at this time, the officer was so many years old and had so many years on. But we'll show you, and 304 cases is a good data set.
It's a great data set.
And we are producing our third quarter data report for the academy now with all those numbers.
And you're how far through that?
We're approaching 90% right now.
Oh, okay.
So I think the last time I talked to you about it, actually in POU, I said we just started and we're at 4%. So
right.
We're at 90%.
Okay, well that's a big jump.
These guys
Well, it's been big,
worked really hard.
Right.
To you, it's a big jump. To us, we're living this every day.
Right.
Tactical has its own annual report. They do a really nice report on the details of the tactical activities. So that's one that you want to look at as well.
Okay.
So this isn't the only vehicle, and this has to get done. And so
I'm not saying it wasn't thorough, I was just having questions about, is it just
Do I
questions
look
that occurred to
sensitive?
me? It's just questions that were occurring to me as I was thinking.
Yeah, no,
data.
these are really good questions, and we've had several conversations, people have asked really good questions, and we're thrilled that people actually read it, because these two did a huge amount of work on this.
Well, I mean, I really appreciate your going through this, because I think it's the kind of information that we want, but I think, I mean, the outcome data is the kind of information that's necessary, but I think the methodology, you know, behind the scenes, what you've done to get there helps us try to understand what the data involves.
Well, we've been writing a cookbook for both internal use specifically for analysts across within APD, and with you all specifically in mind. You're going to get the data, and as you look at it, you're going to go, what? And you know, you just got to say, okay, this starts to make sense, and here's what we do. These guys did A, B, and C. I think they need to do E, F, and G. And then we have some conversations about the methodology. But if you cook it according to our recipe, that's the chart you get.
Right.
And the steps are really clear. But it's incredibly complex data.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I know you do. So you've been specifically in our thoughts.
Well, thank you again, all of you, for
Yeah, thank you.
coming here. And you gave us more than we could have hoped for. You know?
Okay.
And it was good. It was,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Extra copy?
I will print it. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys.
if you got it, I mean, I've got it. You know,
Thanks.